How's everybody doing this evening? Monday morning quarterback, episode 73. Glad you could join us. Great week of racing last week for CSI. We were at the SmackDown, which is a big USAC race for us, probably the biggest non-wing race here in the Midwest. And we won the second night with Logan Seavey in the Reinbold car. It was his first national sprint car win, so that was cool. And then Tyler Courtney took the 11,000 to win finale for us, which was awesome. And 4 of the top 6 were on our shocks. Kyle Cummins ran second. Him and Courtney kind of dominated the race and didn't have very many challenges. Those two were pretty checked out. So really good to see Sunshine have a good week. He took a big chunk out of the national point lead there, moved back to second in points, and I think ended up chipping away 40 points at the lead, still a little over 100 back, but plenty of racing left. And then Kyle Cummins, he's won about a dozen races or so this year, and you can say, oh, he's won MSCS races and some local races, but man, he was fast every night of Sprint Week and a contender at SmackDown, and won a couple Sprint Week shows. So really good to see a local team compete at the highest level, and obviously glad to have him on our stuff. So Tim and Hank and those guys have the 3R rolling, and Kyle's doing a good job at the controls. So tonight we have a little video we put together earlier today. Now bear with us, I'm not a producer or director, and Kevin, certainly it's been a few years since his glory days of sprint car racing, and he wasn't really polished behind the camera, so it took a couple takes and I cut some stuff together, so it's not spliced together professionally, but a lot of good information, and we will show that video and then I'll answer your questions. So for those of you who don't know, Kevin Thomas, who had the steering gear business that we purchased, and now he's working here for us. No relation to Kevin Thomas Jr., even though they're both from Alabama. But Kevin Thomas was a very accomplished racer in this area, 4-time Sprint Week champ, I think 7 or 8 USAC national wins to his credit, bunch of track championships. So he's been building steering gears for about 30 years, and we're super happy to have him on board and working with us and being able to offer that other service to our customers. So I will cut over to this video and then come back and answer all of your questions, and we'll dive right in. So without further ado, here is the video with Kevin and I talking about the importance of maintenance on your steering boxes. Hey, Garrett with CSI. We're here today with Kevin Thomas, who joined our team a few weeks ago when we purchased his business, KT's Racing Services. So now we're doing steering gear and pump repair. And Kevin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in this stuff?
Well, I started racing sprint cars myself in 1978, and in 1982 I moved up here to Indianapolis, and I started working for Jim McQueen and Bobby Atkins, and one of the services they performed was steering gear repair, and I cut my teeth working for them. And then in 1987 I opened up my own business and been going ever since. And then Garrett came along and Steve Fox, and now we're a team together working, and I think it's working out great.
Great. So currently we're doing steering gears and pumps. We're also going to sell new steering gears and pumps. And tell us about the brands that we work on here and why we work on those particular brands.
Well, the brands that we work on primarily are KSE, Nichols Brothers, Profile, and Lee.
So Kevin, tell us a little bit about how frequently somebody should be sending their gears and pumps in, and why it's so important to have them checked on a regular basis.
Well, over the years I've found that you'll start to see a performance decrease around 30 shows, and that's primarily for the steering gears themselves. Now on the pump side, what I've found is that after about 20 to 25 shows, you can have a little decrease in the performance of the pump due to the relief valve spring. It'll lose a little bit of spring rate and a little of overall height, which will decrease your line pressure. So I just have my customers send them in. We'll dyno the pump. If everything's good, then there's not any charge for that. But if you have to, you might have to put a relief spring. It's just it's a good practice to keep your pump at its best, because if you try to run a steering gear with very low pump pressure, what it can do is cause spool valve damage. And whenever you have a low pump pressure situation on a steering gear, what happens typically is the driver is moving his arms, but the front wheels aren't moving, and you have a delayed reaction until it goes all the way over to what's called mechanical override. And every time you make it bang over to the mechanical override side, you're doing a little more damage. You can possibly be doing damage to your spool valve in the pin and the torsion bar area.
Yeah, so just like the shock stuff, they need to be maintenance on a regular basis. We're trying to get the last few percent out of these race cars. Everything's so tight now. It's just very important. So that you made me aware of, and we've made our sales guys aware of, that they're answering the phone. When you're sending in a steering gear to get repaired, you really need to send the pump in with it. So talk to us a little bit about why that's so important for guys sending in steering gears.
Yeah, the steering and a pump is a complete system, and they have to work together. They're not independent of each other. So if you send the steering in and you get it back, and if it isn't operating properly, we would have a real problem with not knowing whether or not the pump was in good shape. So if you send them both in, that way we can assure you that we know the entire system is working as it should be.
Yeah, so guys are sending in their stuff from all over, whether you're a CSI Shock customer or not. We'd love to help you with your steerings. Our current turnaround time is 3 to 4 days, but that'll vary depending on the time of year. So if you have any questions, feel free to call us. We have more information about it on our website, and we can certainly help get you pointed in the right direction and answer any questions you have. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll go back to Monday Morning Quarterback and answer all your questions.
Thank you.
All right, so that was Kevin and I kind of breaking down the importance of the steering gear maintenance. And even though I worked around race cars, my whole life, midget, sprint car stuff, this was definitely one area that I lacked knowledge in and wasn't super aware of the importance of those steering gears, and if the pressures weren't right and they weren't maintenance regularly, how easy it would be to give false feedback to your crew and for things not to operate properly. So it's been a big learning lesson for me, getting to see the inside of those steering gears. And even though they're a somewhat simplistic piece, there's not a ton going on in there. There's a few key areas and some things that are really, really tight tolerances. So it fits really right into our wheelhouse for what we do here with the shocks and everything needing to be real precise. So happy to jump over and answer any questions. Hello, Rick and Ed. Thanks for joining us tonight and spending a few minutes with us. We are off to Darlington on Wednesday for our last big USAC National Quarter Midget Race of the year. There's a race in Vegas, but we're not going to that one. We go to the Winter Nationals every year, and one trip to Vegas a year is enough. We can tend to lose enough money on that one trip, so I don't need to go twice. So yeah, Darlington this week, and then next week is the BC 39, so super excited about that. There will be no Monday Morning Quarterback next week, as we'll be traveling back from Darlington and the holiday there, so we'll skip next week. But when we come back on the 9th, I believe it is, the 9th of September, we're going to have a special guest that's going to do the show live with me that night, and so we'll give you some more information on that as it gets a little closer. But that's an episode I'm excited about. It'll be very informative, and to have two of us here on live at 9 o'clock at night will be good. So anybody that's tuned in, have any questions regarding steering gears and pumps, or anything with your shocks, torsion bars, suspension, racing setups, we're happy to answer those for you. Two questions I had emailed in today, and one was, what is the preference on shock mounting, shaft up or shaft down? And the whole sprung and unsprung weight theory gets tossed around a lot, and I just don't think, as light as the shock absorbers are nowadays, that there is a measurable difference there. So typically, if you're running cables, shaft up, you can route the cables a lot easier, and the shorter the cable is, the more direct that's routed, the more positive that adjustment will be, and at that point then, as your driver is adjusting in the cockpit, it's actually adjusting what he thought at the shock. So if you run your cable really long or you route it down and up, they tend to not be a super positive adjustment. So I usually would mount shaft up if we're running cables. And And then the other factor that I think about is heat. So a lot of the tracks are going to mufflers on the sprint cars, and that adds, another 6 or 8 inches and gets it that much closer to the shock. So you want to be careful to not saturate that shock with heat. We see some shocks come in that have gotten so hot from exhaust that it's actually discolored the anodize. It's not a black shock anymore. It's a kind of a purplish gold. So I know that thing's gotten really, really hot. Typically we'll see it on the left rear because the tire's so big and tucked up next to it that not much heat gets to it. So that's another thing to keep in mind is heat. But as far as a performance advantage on one mounted it one way or the other, I really don't think there is one. No other questions. So the second question I had sent in was a quarter midget question, and it was regarding the wheelbase and what the ideal wheelbase was. And that's really a tough question because a lot of the different cars, their motor placement's different. I know on a Stanley car, I always ran the wheelbase as short as possible. So I would, as I'm squaring the car, I would get that right side, those right rear radius rods as short as possible, and then square the left to that, and then square the front to the rear. But typically we try to run as short a wheelbase as possible. The exception might be like indoors where the track's got artificial traction additive to it, so it's really sticky. A little bit longer wheelbase at those places isn't necessarily a problem, but for the most part outdoors, like the shortest wheelbase I could get seemed to be better. Cars seem to rotate a little nicer and get up off the corner better. So Tim Driscoll, what's the difference between a raised perch and a flat perch? Well, initially, the raised perch was created for clearance. Some of the axles, the way they were gusseted, the flat perch ran into that. And so the raised perch changed the shape of that and got the spring up a little bit to clear that gusseting. Now, as we've went to a little bit shorter springs, most people are off the really short 3-inch springs, but the 4 1/4 inch springs, the raised perch can kind of keep your ride height adjuster in the middle of the shock body a little bit better. So we like 9-to-1 raised perches versus flat at this stage in the game. I think the only downside to a raised perch is if you were maybe running a 5-inch spring and trying to get your car really low, it might have your ride height adjuster at the very edge of the shock body. So, but there's no performance advantage there. It was really initially designed to have clearance on the front axle. So that was a quarter midget question. Kenny with the new track record out in California, so that was awesome. Congratulations. That's pretty impressive. I also know my buddy Danny Stratton, his boys got I think 4 track records on the weekend, so that was awesome with the quarter midgets. Looking forward to getting to Darlington and seeing a lot of our quarter midget friends. We haven't really been to a race since Brickyard, so mid-July on the quarter midget side we had a lot of micro and midget and sprint car races. So end of the year we go to Vegas for a quarter midget race, and then we'll be at some races in the fall with Hudson able to start racing at the club level here next month. So Preston, what are wing sprint car guys running for progressive bump kits? A lot of them just left rear, but we do have some guys running at left rear and right rear when the track gets slick with a lot of success. So I think if you get your gaps right, there's a definite advantage to when you get the wings slid back. Having that bump rubber on the left rear and right rear gives you the ability to go softer on torsion bar, but still have the spring rate needed to load the tire adequately and then hold the attitude of the car with the bump rubber. So it's not super easy to do. It takes a little bit of trying and figuring out what the ideal gap is for your car and your application. But once you get it right, I think it's a huge advantage. So I think most of the guys that are just running on the left rear, they either aren't in a position to do any experimenting or testing. and haven't gotten figured it out yet. But I think you will see it going to that in the future once these guys get it a little more refined. I think you'll see bump rubbers across the back of majority of the wing sprint cars. So, anybody else that's tuned in have questions? Monday Morning Quarterback episode 73. Again, we're off next week for the holiday, and we're traveling back from Darlington that day. And and then the BC 39 next week. So we hope to see some of you guys there. That would be great. Doesn't look like any other questions. So if I miss your question, always comment. I try to go back on Tuesday mornings and answer any of those questions. Or you can always DM me or shoot me an email. We try to answer all those questions. And I know I get a lot of emails and phone calls on Mondays, and sometimes it takes me till Tuesday to reply to everybody. So I apologize for that. Mondays are a zoo here. It's getting to be in the neighborhood of 40 to 50 contacts on Mondays between emails and phone calls, and with everything else going on, sometimes it takes me till Tuesday. But have no fear, I will get back to you, and I try to do it as efficiently as possible. So. Cool. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. If you have a question and I didn't get to it, like I say, get a hold of me and I will answer it for you. We certainly appreciate you spending a little bit of time with us on a Monday and hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. Take care, everybody.